During World War II, Nazi Germany conducted many experiments with military equipment. After its completion, many secret laboratories and testing grounds of the Third Reich were discovered. Many superweapon projects have been revealed, both crazy and fantastic, as well as very real and almost realized. In this video you will learn about 8 crazy projects of the Third Reich. The first project is heavy bushes and trees. This super heavy rail-mounted artillery piece was named after the director of the company and the wife of the designer. The weapon was intended to destroy fortifications on the borders of Germany with Belgium and France along the Maginot Line, the most powerful fortifications that existed at that time. It was only built in 1941. The weight of the gun was 1,350 tons, the height was almost 12 meters, which is comparable to a 3-story house. Width 6 meters and length 42 meters. The barrel had a caliber of 807 millimeters, but after firing, due to ultra-high pressure and friction, it increased by 3 millimeters. And its length was 32 meters. The weight of the shell for the gun was 7 tons, and the firing range reached 50 kilometers. The shell itself could penetrate 8 meters of concrete. The gun was first used during the assault on Sevastopol in 1942. Dora was brought in the strictest secrecy in parts. It was assembled on site by a team of 20 engineers. The guns were guarded by fighters from the air, and several units on the ground. The road was additionally protected from air attacks by a reinforced air defense artillery division of 400 people. In total, more than 4,000 people were involved in the protection and maintenance of the gun. Dora caused damage to 2 important ports and an ammunition depot in Sevastopol. The roar from her shots was heard 40 kilometers away. After Sevastopol, Dora was sent to Leningrad, and from there to S for repairs. The second time it was used was in 1944 to suppress the Warsaw Uprising. Later, during the retreat, the Nazis also took Dora out in parts. It was not possible to capture it entirely. Doru and Heavy Gustav were blown up by the Germans in Bavaria, shortly before the arrival of Soviet troops. The second project is the Tank Rat. This is a super heavy tank, the project of which was developed in Germany in 1943 under the leadership of Edward Groth. The Rat tank was supposed to weigh up to 1,000 tons. The crew number was up to 36 people. The tank was very big. The length was 35 meters, width 14 meters, and height 11 meters. Which is comparable to Doro guns occupying the first position in the rating. The tank's armor reached up to 400 millimeters in some places. It was also planned to build a garage into it, which would house 2 BMW R12 reconnaissance motorcycles, several storage rooms and a bathroom. The main armament of the tank were 2 naval guns, 283 millimeters in caliber, mounted in a rotating turret located in the front of the hull. In the bow of the tank there were 2 15mm machine guns. The tank was also equipped with 8 anti-aircraft guns, 38 flags in 2 quadruple mounts. This monster must be propelled by 8 22-cylinder marine engines, with a capacity of 2,000 horsepower, or 2 12-cylinder Manx marine engines, with a capacity of 8,400 horsepower each. The tank's cruising range was supposed to be about 190 kilometers, and the speed was up to 40 kilometers per hour, which is very unlikely. However, an insurmountable obstacle for the Rat was the lack of equipment technology for production and the common sense of Speyer, who at the beginning of 1943 closed all land cruiser projects. You can name all these developments, miracle weapons, in quotation marks. Cars with such enormous weight were impossible to transport. The bridges could not support them, and the tanks themselves would easily get stuck in the mud. And they would be completely defenseless against aviation. The third flying saucer project is Hanebuk. About the developments of the Third Reich, in the field of flying saucers. Today a lot is known, but questions are not getting smaller over the years. This project involved the creation of huge flying saucers that would take off vertically. The project itself is shrouded in great secrecy, but as indicated in some open sources. Hanbuttu, which took off in 1944, has enviable characteristics. 26 meters in diameter, perpetual motion machine tachyonator 70, with a diameter of 23 meters. The speed of the device could reach about 6,000 kilometers per hour. The Austrian scientist and inventor Walter Stahlberg worked on the creation of engines for the Hanubs. Huge allocations were allocated for these developments and were under the constant control of Hitler himself. According to calculations, the probable duration of the flight was calculated at over 55 hours. The crew consisted of 9 people and 11 passengers were provided with everything necessary for the duration of the flight. To hit the enemy, the ship was equipped with 4 gun turrets, 277 mm caliber, and the carrying capacity was about 100 tons. In 1944, the Germans were going to start mass production of this aircraft. But soon after the tests, even newer versions of the machines appeared. Until now, the fate of this development is unknown, and there is no documentary evidence of this fact. The photos that appeared in the press with articles were recognized as fakes. The fourth project of the mortar Karl. This is the largest and heaviest self-propelled mortar in the world. A total of 7 such examples have been built since 1940. They were used to storm fortresses and heavily fortified enemy positions. The mortar turned out to be truly huge with a length of more than 11 meters and a height of more than 4 meters. Karl weighed 124 tons. At the same time, the barrel length with a caliber 600 mm is only 5 meters, only twice as long as the projectile itself. The elevation angle of the trunk is up to 70 degrees. The result was a classic mortar, a very short barrel, but a powerful projectile and a steep firing trajectory. In the horizontal plane, the barrel could only rotate within a sector of 4 degrees. Light and heavy concrete piercing projectiles weighing 1,700 and 2,070 kilograms, as well as high explosive projectiles weighing 1,250 kilograms, were developed for firing. The concrete piercing projectile was fired at an initial speed of 220 meters per second and pierced a concrete wall up to 3.5 meters thick, or a steel slab 450 millimeters thick. The initial speed of the high explosive projectile was 283 meters per second. They fired at a range of 6,700 meters. The maximum flight time of the projectiles was 49 seconds. The gun's rate of fire is 1 shot per 10 minutes. The Marder was driven by a Daimler-Benz engine with a power of 580 horsepower and accelerated the super heavy vehicle to 10 km per hour. Mortars were first used in combat conditions on June 22, 1941 during the storming of the Brest fortress. On August 6, 1941, mortars were used during the siege of Sevastopol together with the super heavy railway artillery guns Dor. In August 1944, the installation shelled Warsaw during the suppression of the Warsaw Uprising. The German mortar Karl is the last of a line of super heavy guns and the last combat unit in a series of self-propelled mortars. A clear example of the hopeless impasse into which the military thought of the Third Reich had reached. Fifth Project Horten Hot 9. This is an experimental jet aircraft, the development of which was carried out in Germany during the Second World War. Designed by the Horten brothers from 1931. The Horten Hot 9 was the first turbojet aircraft built using the aerodynamic flying wing design. Thanks to its shape, the bomber was barely noticeable to radar since the Second World War and, in principle, could fly to the coast of Britain without arousing suspicion among enemy aircraft. The plane did not have a fuselage of any kind. The thickness of the center section was sufficient to accommodate the pilot and engine. There was no vertical tail. Course control was carried out by spoilers installed on the wing. The aircraft was powered by 2 Juma 4 turbojet engines with a thrust of 890 kilograms each. The plane's crew consisted of only 1 pilot. The maximum speed tended to 1,000 kilometers per hour, as well as the maximum flight range tended to 1,000 kilometers. The practical flight ceiling reached 16 kilometers. On March 1, 1944, the first flight took place. In total, 6 aircraft were in production at various stages of production, and units for 20 aircraft were ordered for the needs of fighter aircraft. 2 planes took off. On April 14, 1945, Wankerton was captured by the U.S. Army. It was dismantled and transported to America. The USA thoroughly tested the aircraft, and this allowed the Americans to create several aircraft without tails. One of the latest such vehicles is the B-2 strategic bomber. The 6th V-2 project. It was the world's first long-range ballistic missile, developed by German designer Wernher von Braun and adopted by the Wehrmacht at the end of World War II. The rockets were single-stage and had a liquid rocket engine, with a turbopump fuel supply, and were launched vertically. A revolutionary autonomous guidance system entered the active part of the action trajectory. The target coordinates were entered into the onboard analog computer before launch. Gyroscopes installed on the rocket controlled its spatial position throughout the flight. And any deviation from the given trajectory was corrected by 4 gas dynamic rudders placed in the jet stream of the engine along the periphery of the nozzle. The cruising speed was 5,940 km per hour. The flight range reached 320 km, the trajectory altitude up to 90 km. The warhead could hold up to 800 kg of amytal. The first launch took place in March 1942, and the first combat launch on September 8, 1944. The number of combat missile launches carried out was 3,225. The shelling was mainly carried out on the territory of Great Britain, especially the City of London. The V-2 is the first object in history to make a suborbital space flight, reaching an altitude of 188 kilometers during a vertical launch. This happened in 1944. After the war, the V-2 was the prototype for the development of the first ballistic missiles in the USA, USSR, and other countries. The 7th project is a solar cannon. This is a colossal orbital mirror that could burn entire cities and drain water bodies with its beam. Similar developments became known in 1945, when the works of the scientist Hermann Oberth fell into the hands of the Allies. The idea was to build an orbital station and place a huge mirror on it. The mirror was supposed to focus and reflect sunlight, hitting enemies with a deadly solar beam straight from space. They planned to assemble the station in space from separate modules, which, for example, was later implemented in the ISS. Artificial gravity was to be provided through rotation, and the delivery of modules into orbit would be carried out by a fully developed V-2. The operation of the station was to be supported by steam generators powered by solar energy. Inside, the gardens actively absorb carbon dioxide and provide the station with oxygen. But the most important element of the complex is a monstrous reflector with an area of about 9 square kilometers. The surface of the mirror was planned to be coated with metallic sodium, a soft alkali metal of silver color. In a state without parabolic action, the mirror was supposed to reflect sunlight, protecting the station crew. Using rocket engines, the installation could be deployed so as to focus the sun's rays on a relatively small area of land. It was believed that this would be enough to destroy entire cities. But there is no reliable evidence that the Germans were seriously working on this project. Local scientists told the story of the superweapon to the Americans who occupied Helfsleben. It is worth noting that the first information about this fantastic weapon appeared in the American press in 1945, on the eve of the complete surrender of Germany. It is possible that all this was just part of the propaganda needed by the Allies at this time. The 8th project is Type 21 submarines. This is a series of ultramodern German diesel, electric submarines from the Second World War. These boats were the first in the world to use ready-made sections in mass production. The structurally sound body had a modular design and consisted of 9 separate sections. The frames were located not inside, but outside the strong hull, so that the internal space could be used more efficiently. The robust body was assembled entirely by welding. The maximum diving depth of the submarine reached 220 meters, the calculated destructive depth was 330 meters. Underwater displacement, 2,114 tons. Surface speed is 15 knots, and underwater speed is 17 knots. The power plant included 2 inline diesel engines manufactured by MAN, each with a capacity of 2,000 horsepower. 2 main electric motors, each with a power of 2,500 horsepower. In addition to them, the boats had 2 electric creeping motors with a power of 113 horsepower. With creeping engines at 6 knots, the boat could move for 48 hours. The submarine actually did not produce any noise perceptible to hydroacoustic equipment. The submarine included torpedo and anti-aircraft weapons. The crew consisted of 58 people. 49 sleeping places were provided for them. Since 1943, 118 ships have been under construction. Only 2 boats were able to take part in the fighting. Series 21 submarines influenced the entire post-war submarine shipbuilding industry. The project included a number of revolutionary innovations, electromechanical loading of torpedo tubes, and a hydroacoustic system that allows attacks without visual contact. Enlarged batteries, a rubber coating that impedes the operation of enemy sonars, as well as a bubble curtain device. For the first time, submarines were designed for scuba diving, during the entire autonomous voyage. The miracle weapon of the Third Reich could hardly have changed the course of World War II. Already in view of the complexity of the design, most of these projects and in conditions of limited resources, it was not possible to establish mass production of one or another retaliation weapon. However, we must say thanks to the Germans and their passion for such epic experiments. The more time and resources they spent on these crazy projects, the less they had left for actually effective weapon systems.